Good morning, my dears. This is Grandma Ophelia, 68 years young, speaking to you from my little home in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. This gentle breeze from the river is such a blessing in this terrible heat. Today I'm here to share a story I've kept bottled up for more than 50 years. A story of pain and abandonment, but also of overcoming and, ultimately, forgiveness. Before I begin this difficult journey, I'd like to ask a small favor from my heart. Please subscribe to Grandma, hit that like button, it costs nothing, and tell me in the comments which corner of America you're watching from. Also, comment about your relationship with your parents. You'll discover mine today. I was born in 1957, in a simple wooden house by the river in Oak Ridge. I never knew my father. When I was very young, my mother Kathy said he had traveled far away and would return someday. Later, when I was about 7, she finally told me he had died of a rare throat cancer before I was even born. I didn't even have a photo of him. Nothing. It was as if a part of my story had been torn away before it even began. My mother. Oh, my mother. It's hard to talk about her without my heart feeling tight. Kathy was a beautiful woman who turned heads wherever she went with that long black hair and the way she swayed when she walked. But it was an empty beauty, without warmth. I never felt a mother's love from her. No caress at bedtime, no comfort when I fell and hurt my knee, no words of pride when I showed her a drawing I had made at school. "Ophelia, stop being so clingy. You're like a tick," she would say when I tried to hug her. We lived alone until I was 13. She worked as a saleswoman in a clothing store downtown, earned little, complained a lot. At night, she often left all dressed up and only returned at dawn, smelling of whiskey and cheap perfume. I stayed home alone, afraid of the night noises, curling up under the thin sheet, praying for her to return soon. The house was always my responsibility. From the age of 8, I was already cooking, washing clothes, sweeping, mopping the floor. If I didn't do it right, I'd get quite a lecture. "You can't even take care of a house, Ophelia. What will happen when you grow up? No man will want someone so useless." That's how it was. I grew up hearing that I was worthless, that I was trouble, that I was a burden. A child shouldn't hear these things, but I heard them every blessed day. At school, I was the quiet girl, the one who sat in the back and didn't raise her hand even when I knew the answer. I didn't have real friends. The other children had parents who came to pick them up, brought homemade lunches, got kisses on the forehead before entering the gate. I went back and forth alone, with a dry cookie in my pocket if I was lucky. I think that's why I became so attached to Mrs. Jenkins, my third-grade teacher. She noticed something was wrong, gave me extra attention, sometimes even gave me a piece of her own lunch. "You're smart, Ophelia. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise," she would tell me. For a while, those words were the only good thing I heard about myself. I kept them deep in my heart, like someone keeping a precious little seed, waiting for the day to plant it. Life was already difficult, but it got much worse when Alan showed up. I was 13 when my mother brought him home for the first time. He was tall, strong, with a perpetually unshaven beard and a cigarette smell that permeated everything around him. He worked as a security guard at a nightclub, had large, calloused hands, and a way of looking that gave me chills. "This is Alan, my daughter. He's going to live with us now," my mother announced, without even asking what I thought. At first, he even tried to be nice. He'd bring a sweet treat occasionally, ask about school, compliment the food I made. But soon, the mask fell off. It started with complaints about the house not being clean the way he liked, then about the food being bland, then about me existing in the same space as him. "This girl just sits there, taking up space and eating what she doesn't help buy," he would say to my mother, as if I wasn't right there hearing everything. And the worst part, my mother agreed. She would shrug and say, "Yeah, she's old enough, she could help more." As if I didn't already do everything in that house. As if she wasn't the one spending money on new lipstick and beer on the weekend. The house, which was already sad before, became a place of fear. Alan had an explosive temper. Any little thing was reason to yell, bang on the table, break a glass. I lived walking on eggshells, trying to be invisible, doing everything perfectly so as not to give him reason to get irritated. Once, he came home drunk and found a dirty glass I had forgotten in the sink. He took the glass and threw it against the wall, shattering it. Then he pointed his finger in my face. "Next time you leave the house untidy, the glass goes at your head, understood?" My mother, who was sitting right there in the living room, didn't even look up from the magazine she was flipping through. It was as if this was normal, as if threatening a 13-year-old girl was the most natural thing in the world. That night, I cried quietly on my thin mattress laid out on the floor of the little back room. I didn't understand why my mother didn't defend me, why she allowed that man, who wasn't even my father, to treat me that way. Didn't she love me even a little bit? Was I so bad that I didn't even deserve protection? It was during this time that I began to take refuge in Mrs. Sullivan's small flower shop, an elderly lady who lived 2 streets down from our house. It was a little corner of peace in that hostile world. Mrs. Sullivan let me help water the plants, sort seeds, make simple arrangements. In exchange, she gave me a little pocket money, and more importantly, treated me with kindness. "Girl, you have a good hand with plants. Look how beautiful this violet is since you started taking care of it," she would say, and my chest would fill with a pride I had never felt before. In Mrs. Sullivan's flower shop, I could be someone different. I wasn't useless Ophelia, the one who only caused trouble. I was Ophelia with the good hands, the one who made flowers more beautiful. For a few hours, I would forget about Alan, my cold mother, the house that felt more like a prison. But the peace didn't last long. I always had to go back home, and each day that passed, the atmosphere there got worse. Alan drank more, yelled more, broke more things. My mother, in turn, seemed to wither like a flower without water. The sparkle in her eyes faded, the sway when she walked disappeared, replaced by a tired dragging of feet. Sometimes, late at night, I would hear her crying in the bedroom. Other times, I would hear the unmistakable sound of a slap to the face, followed by her apology. I wanted to help, but what could a skinny 13-year-old girl do against a man Alan's size? The last straw happened on a Wednesday night. I was washing the dinner dishes. My mother and Alan were still sitting at the table, him drinking whiskey straight from the bottle. My hands were trembling with nervousness. He had already complained about the food, saying the rice was undercooked, that the meat was tough. I knew I was treading on dangerous ground. That's when it happened. A plate slipped from my soapy hands and shattered on the floor. The noise seemed to echo through the entire house, and for a second, everything was silent. Then came the sound of the chair being violently pushed back. "You worthless brat!" Alan came to me in 3 wide strides. He grabbed my hair and pulled my head back, forcing me to look into his eyes. Bloodshot eyes, red with rage and alcohol. "If you break one more thing in this house, you'll get the worst beating of your life. You hear me, you little tramp?" Tears were streaming down my face, but I couldn't make a sound. Fear had frozen my voice. I looked at my mother, silently begging for help. You know what she did? She gave a nervous little laugh and said, "She is clumsy, just like her father was." It was the only time I heard her compare anything about me to my father. And it was to humiliate me, to agree with the monster who was pulling my hair until my scalp burned. Alan let me go with a shove that made me hit my back against the sink. He went back to the table, grabbed the whiskey bottle, and went out to the porch, muttering about kids who only cause trouble and should have gotten rid of her a long time ago. I finished washing the dishes with trembling hands, and my heart beating so hard it felt like it was going to come out of my mouth. That night, lying on my mattress, I made a promise to myself. One day I would leave that house. One day I would be free. One day I would find people who would treat me with love, with respect. What I didn't know was that this one day was still far away, and that before it arrived, I would go through the most terrible moment of my life. A moment that would begin with a simple wet floor and end with dirt covering my body in a shallow grave in our backyard. But that, my dears, is a story for later in the video. A story of terror, but also of courage, of how a frightened girl found within herself the strength to survive the unimaginable. The week after that incident with the broken plate was a real hell. Alan seemed to have discovered a new pleasure, terrorizing me. Every time I entered a room where he was, I felt those small eyes following me, like a predator studying prey. I began to do everything with even more care, checking 3 times before putting anything on the table, cleaning every corner of the house until it shined. My mother, who before at least pretended not to notice what was happening, now began to imitate his behavior. She complained about my messy hair, my simple clothes, the way I spoke. "Straighten that posture, girl. You look like a hunchback," she would say as I washed clothes bent over the wash basin. "And wash Alan's shirt properly, last time it was stained." It was as if a shadow had fallen over our house. What little light still existed had completely gone out. It was on a rainy Friday that everything got worse. The sky of Oak Ridge had been heavy since early morning, that kind of southern downpour that seems like it's going to swallow the world. The humidity penetrated everything. The walls, the hanging clothes, even into our bones. I had just mopped the living room floor when Alan arrived from work, soaked and in a bad mood. "What's this musty smell?" he complained as soon as he stepped inside. "It's the rain," I replied softly, already retreating to the kitchen. "Everything's wet outside." He muttered something I didn't understand and went to the bedroom to change clothes. I took the opportunity to finish cleaning the hallway that led to the bedrooms, quickly passing the wet mop. I was in a hurry, wanting to finish before he returned. Perhaps that's why I didn't wring the mop properly, leaving the floor wetter than it should have been. Sure enough, Alan came out of the bedroom stepping firmly, as he always did, and as soon as he put his foot in the hallway, he slipped. He didn't fall completely. He supported himself against the wall, but it was enough to awaken that fury I knew so well. "You imbecile! Want to kill me?" he shouted, his face red with anger. "Don't even know how to mop a floor right?" I dropped the bucket and ran to the backyard, thinking that maybe out there with the rain and neighbors nearby, he wouldn't dare hit me. I was wrong. Alan came after me like an enraged bull. "Get back here! I'm not done talking to you!" I stood still under the oak tree, the fine rain soaking me completely, trembling not from cold, but from fear. Alan stopped at the back door, looking at the heavy sky, as if deciding whether it was worth getting wet to come after me. "All right," he finally said, with a calmness that frightened me more than the shouting. "Stay there, but don't say I didn't warn you." He went back into the house, leaving me there, soaked and confused. What did he mean by that? Through the kitchen window, I saw when he said something to my mother, who just nodded her head, without questioning. Then he left again, this time through the front door, disappearing down the street. I stayed in the backyard for almost an hour, afraid to go in. When I finally gathered the courage, my mother was sitting at the kitchen table, smoking one cigarette after another. "Mom, what is Alan going to do to me?" I asked, my voice almost disappearing with fear. She took a long drag before answering, without looking into my eyes. "If I were you, I'd pack my things and get out of here before he comes back." My heart froze. "Are you telling me to leave home?" "I'm not telling you anything. I'm just saying he's very angry, and you know how he gets when he's like that." "But I have nowhere to go," I protested, tears already blurring my vision. She shrugged, as if that wasn't her problem. "Then go to that old lady's flower shop you like so much." At that moment, I understood that I was completely alone. My own mother was throwing me to the wolves, washing her hands of what could happen to me. I ran to my little room, grabbed my school backpack, and put in the few important things I had. A change of clothes, my class photo, a holy card of the Virgin Mary that I got from Mrs. Sullivan. I was about to leave through the back door when I heard the noise of Alan's pickup truck parking in front of the house. I froze. It was too late. Through the window, I saw him get out of the car carrying something long and heavy. It took me a few seconds to understand what it was. A shovel. A big shovel for digging holes. The terror I felt at that moment is indescribable. My legs went weak, my stomach turned, my mouth went dry. Why had he brought a shovel? What was he planning to do? I hid under the kitchen table, as I used to do when I was younger, and afraid of storms. I heard when he came in, slamming the door hard. "Where is she?" he asked my mother. "In her room, I think." His heavy footsteps approached, and soon his legs appeared in my field of vision. He bent down, his face appearing under the tablecloth, a wicked smile on his lips. "Found you, pest. Get out of there." Reluctantly, I crawled out of my hiding place. He grabbed my arm hard, dragging me out of the house to the backyard. The rain had increased, now falling in thick curtains. "You're going to learn to respect me," he said through his teeth, pushing me to the most remote corner of the yard, where the trees created dense shadows even during the day. That's when I saw it, a large rectangular hole, dug in the soft earth of the backyard. It looked like a grave. "No, please," I begged, trying to break free, scratching his arm with my nails. "I didn't mean to, I swear. The floor was wet because of the rain." Alan just laughed, a guttural sound that had nothing human about it. With a strong push, he threw me into the hole. I fell on my back in the wet earth, the impact knocking the air out of my lungs. Before I could recover, he jumped into the hole too. What happened in the next few minutes is something I've tried to block from my memory for decades. His large hands tearing my blouse, touching where no one should touch a 13-year-old girl. His heavy breathing in my face, the smell of whiskey and cigarettes choking me. The disgusting words whispered in my ear. Promises of what he would do to me if I screamed, if I told anyone. I closed my eyes and transported myself far away from there. In my mind, I was at Mrs. Sullivan's flower shop, among the colorful flowers, the sweet smell of jasmine in the air, gentle hands teaching me how to make a beautiful arrangement. It was the only way to survive that moment, to leave my body there, but send my soul to a safe place. When he finished, he got out of the hole, panting, adjusting his belt. He looked down at me, curled up, dirty with earth and tears, and smiled. "Now you're going to stay there thinking about what you did." And then, to my absolute horror, he began to throw dirt on top of me. "Stop!" I screamed, the panic giving me strength I didn't know I had. "You're going to kill me!" "Shut up! I'm not going to bury you completely or yet, just enough for you to learn your lesson." He continued throwing dirt, covering my legs, my belly. When it reached my neck, he stopped. He looked satisfied at his work and then said, in a casual tone, like someone commenting on the weather, "Tomorrow morning I'll come get you out of there. If you've learned to be a good girl, maybe I'll let you continue living in this house. If not," he left the sentence hanging in the air, the implicit threat more frightening than any word. And then he was gone, leaving me there, buried up to my neck in a hole in the backyard, with the fine rain falling on my face, mixing with the tears that wouldn't stop flowing. I screamed for help a few times, but the rain muffled my voice. Besides, our house was on a large lot, away from others. Nobody would hear me. Nobody would come to save me. And my mother? Where was she while all this was happening? I looked at the kitchen window and saw her there, standing, watching. For a moment our eyes met, and I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. But then she closed the curtain, choosing once again not to see, not to act, not to protect me. The hours dragged on endlessly. Night fell, bringing with it the cold of the southern midnight. My body, trapped under the heavy earth, began to tingle, then to hurt, until finally going numb. The rain continued to fall, sometimes harder, sometimes a fine drizzle, soaking my face, my hair. At some point, exhausted from crying, I fell asleep. I dreamed of my father, a faceless man who extended his hand to me, trying to pull me out of that hole. "It's not your time yet," he said in a deep and gentle voice. "You need to fight. You need to survive." I woke up with the first ray of sunlight hitting my face. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a clean blue sky, almost offensively beautiful considering the hell I was living through. My entire body ached. My throat was dry, my eyes swollen from crying so much. It was at that moment, looking at the blue sky between the oak leaves, that something awakened inside me. A small but intense flame. It wasn't just fear or desperation. It was anger. Anger at Alan for his cruelty. Anger at my mother for her cowardice. And for the first time, anger at myself for having accepted that situation for so long. "I'm not going to die here," I whispered to myself, my voice hoarse. "I'm not going to let him win." I started to move my toes, then my ankles, trying to create space in the compacted earth. It was a slow, painful process. The wet earth stuck to my skin, making every small movement difficult. But I continued, ignoring the pain, the cramps, the fatigue. Inch by inch, I created space to move. I don't know how long it took. Minutes, hours. But eventually, I managed to free my legs enough to bend them. With an effort that seemed to drain my last strength, I pushed my body upward, the earth reluctantly giving way until I managed to sit in the hole. I looked at the house, fearing to see Alan or my mother, but there was no sign of anyone. They must still be sleeping, exhausted after a night of— I'd rather not imagine what they were doing while I was fighting for my life out there. With difficulty, I dragged myself out of the hole. My legs, numb after hours of immobilization, barely supported me. I fell to my knees several times before managing to stand up. My clothes were filthy, torn in several places. I could feel scratches and bruises forming all over my body. My first instinct was to run, to flee from there as fast as possible. But where to? Without money, without documents, with nothing but the clothes on my body, what chances would I have out there? And what if Alan came after me? He knew people all over Oak Ridge, would find me easily. No, running away wasn't the solution. At least not yet. I needed to be smarter. I needed to plan. I dragged myself to the yard faucet and washed my face, drinking water desperately. Then, silently, I entered the house through the back door. Everything was quiet. The clock on the wall read 5:40 in the morning. They would still sleep for at least another hour. I went to my little room, took off my dirty clothes, and put on the only clean outfit I had. I looked at myself in the broken piece of mirror I used to comb my hair. A girl with large, frightened eyes stared back at me, her face dirty with earth, her neck marked by thick fingers. I didn't recognize myself in that fragile, destroyed figure. Never again, I promised my reflection. Never again will I let anyone hurt me like this. I sat on the edge of the mattress, ideas beginning to organize in my mind. If I wanted to survive, I would need to be stronger, more determined than I had ever been. And the first thing to do was to ensure I would have enough time to escape when the time came. I then remembered the pills my mother took to sleep. She kept a blister pack in the kitchen drawer for nights when insomnia attacked her. If I could put some in their breakfast, the plan began to take shape in my head, each detail fitting like pieces of a puzzle. It was risky, dangerous even. But what alternative did I have? Stay and wait for Alan's next punishment, which could very well be my death sentence. No, this would be my only chance. And I wouldn't waste it. With this determination born of desperation, I got up and went to the kitchen. It was time to prepare a special breakfast for my mother and stepfather. A breakfast that would give them a deep sleep and give me the freedom I so longed for. The frightened girl who entered that grave no longer existed. In her place, someone new was emerging, someone willing to do anything to survive. And the first step of this new Ophelia would be taken the next morning, with a plan that would change my life forever. It was still dawn when I started preparing that breakfast. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clearer than ever. The clock on the wall showed 6:15 in the morning when I lit the stove. Usually, Alan and my mother woke up around 7:30, which gave me enough time. First, I prepared everything as usual. The strong coffee that Alan liked, the scrambled eggs, the bread I baked myself twice a week. I wanted it to seem like a normal day, for them not to suspect anything. While the water for coffee was boiling, I went to the drawer where my mother kept the medicines. The blister pack of sleeping pills was there, hidden underneath boxes of Band-Aids and ointments. I looked at those small white pills, my heart beating so hard I thought it would wake the whole house. How many should I use? I didn't want to kill them. As bad as she was still my mother. I just needed them to sleep long enough for me to get out and seek help. I decided to use 4 pills, 2 for each of them. I crushed them with the back of the spoon until they became a fine powder and mixed them into the sugar bowl. My mother always put a lot of sugar in her coffee. Alan drank his without sugar, but sweetened the orange juice he drank right after. It was risky, but it was my only chance. At 7:25, I heard the noise of the shower. Alan always showered first. My mother usually stayed in bed a few more minutes before getting up. I set the table, the cups, the plates, everything perfectly arranged, as he demanded. When Alan entered the kitchen, dressed for work, I forced a smile. "Good morning. Coffee's ready." He looked at me suspiciously. He probably expected to find a crying girl, begging to be released from the hole in the yard. Instead, there I was, apparently submissive, preparing breakfast as if nothing had happened. He grunted. sitting at the table. Looks like the night in the hole taught you something after all. I didn't answer, just served his coffee, black, without sugar, as he liked it. Then, I prepared the orange juice, putting a generous amount of sugar. The sugar mixed with the crushed pills. My mother appeared soon after, her hair still wet from the shower. She looked like she had aged 10 years in that night. There were deep circles under her eyes, and she avoided looking directly at me. "Good morning, Mom," I said, trying to sound normal. "Want some coffee?" She nodded without saying anything and sat at the table. I served her cup, watching as she added 2 heaping spoons of the adulterated sugar. The next few minutes were the longest of my life. I stood near the stove, pretending to clean the counter, while watching out of the corner of my eye as the two of them drank. Each sip they took was like a small victory for me. Each time the liquid touched their lips, I was closer to freedom. Alan finished first, pushing away the empty plate and drinking the orange juice in large, thirsty gulps. Then he got up, took the pickup truck key, and warned, "I'll be back later. And you, young lady, better have this house spotless when I get back." I nodded obediently, avoiding his eyes. He left, slamming the door. From the noise of the engine, I realized that the pickup didn't start on the first try. He tried again, cursing loudly. On the third attempt, the engine finally sputtered to life, and he departed. I was left alone with my mother, who was now washing her cup in the sink. Her hands seemed heavy, her movements slow. The medicine was already beginning to take effect. "I'm going to lie down for a bit," she said, her voice dragging. "I'm feeling strange." "Okay, Mom, get some rest." She staggered to the bedroom, and I waited, counting the minutes. 10 minutes later, I went there and found her sleeping deeply, her breathing heavy and regular. I tested by calling her name, then gently shaking her shoulder. Nothing. She was completely out. Now was my chance. But before I could leave, I heard the noise of the pickup returning. My blood froze. Why was Alan back so soon? I ran to the living room window and saw when he parked haphazardly, almost hitting the fence. He got out of the car, staggering, his face red, his eyes half closed. The medicine had taken effect faster than I imagined. He probably hadn't managed to get very far before he started feeling sleepy. I hid behind the door when he entered, tripping over his own feet. "What the hell?" he muttered, holding onto the wall to avoid falling. I'm feeling sick." He dragged himself to the couch and collapsed right there without even taking off his shoes. In seconds, he was snoring loudly, completely unconscious. I stood still, hardly believing my luck. They were both sleeping deeply, and I was free to leave. But where to go? Who to ask for help? The answer came immediately. The police station. I had to go to the police station and tell them everything, about the abuse, about the hole in the yard, about how my mother allowed it all. I ran to my room and grabbed the small backpack I had already prepared the night before. I added the birth certificate I found in my mother's drawer, the only document that proved who I was. I had no money, but I knew the police station was less than a half-hour walk from downtown. Before leaving, I did one more thing. I took the old camera that belonged to my mother. She rarely used it, kept it as a memento of better times. There was a half-used film still inside. I took the camera to the backyard and took photos of the hole where I spent the night. Then, I took photos of the bruises on my neck, the finger marks on my arms. I needed evidence, in case nobody believed my story. When I finally left that house, the sun was already high in the sky. I walked quickly through the dirt roads of Oak Ridge, avoiding acquaintances, afraid that someone would stop me, send me back. The town was small. Everyone knew each other. If someone warned Alan that they saw me walking alone toward downtown, the police station was a small building, yellowed by time, with a faded sign in front. I entered timidly, clutching the backpack strap against my chest as if it were a shield. Inside, there was a police officer sitting behind a desk, filling out papers. He looked up when I entered, and his eyebrows rose when he saw my condition. Even having washed myself, I still had dirt marks on my neck, visible scratches on my arms, a bruise beginning to appear on my cheek. "What happened to you, girl?" he asked, standing up. The words caught in my throat. Now that I was there, face to face with an authority, the fear returned with full force. What if Alan found out? What if he came after me? What if nobody believed me? Miss, the officer insisted, more gently this time. You're hurt. We can help. But you need to tell us what happened. I took a deep breath, feeling hot tears running down my face. It was now or never. My stepfather, I began, my voice trembling. He hurt me. He buried me in the yard. The officer blinked a few times, as if he hadn't understood correctly. Buried you? What do you mean? And then, like a dam breaking, the words began to pour out. I told everything, from the beginning. How Alan had appeared in our lives, how he started mistreating me, how my mother never defended me. I told about the broken plate, about the wet floor, about the hole in the yard. I told, with a voice broken by sobs, what he had done to me in that hole, before throwing dirt on me and leaving me there all night. As I spoke, more officers gathered around, listening in shocked silence. A female officer was called, and she sat beside me, holding my hand as I continued my account. When I finished, showing the photos I had taken of the hole and my injuries, the silence in the room was heavy, palpable. "Where is he now?" asked the first officer, his voice hard, contained. "At home. He and my mother are sleeping. I put sleeping pills in their coffee." One of the officers let out a low whistle of surprise. The female officer at my side squeezed my hand harder. "You're a very brave girl," she said. "You did the right thing coming here." I didn't feel brave. I felt small, scared, lost. But something in those words lit a spark inside me. Maybe I was brave after all. Maybe I was stronger than I ever imagined. "We're sending a patrol car there right away," said the officer who seemed to be the chief. "Gomez, call Child Protective Services. The girl will need a place to stay." The events of the following hours blended into a blur of emotions and activities. I was taken to a medical office where a gray-haired doctor examined my injuries, took photos for what he called forensic report, asked delicate questions about the abuse I suffered. A social worker appeared, a woman with a calm voice and gentle eyes, explaining that I would temporarily be under state custody until my situation was resolved. Later, I learned that when the police arrived at my house, they found Alan and my mother still sleeping. But the most shocking thing, as soon as the officers entered, Alan woke up startled and, realizing what was happening, attacked one of the officers. In the confusion that followed, they discovered something that explained a lot about my stepfather's behavior. Packages of cocaine hidden in the ceiling lining, an illegal gun under the mattress. Alan wasn't just a violent man. He was a drug dealer, a criminal who used our house as a front for his shady business. And my mother? When she finally woke up, surrounded by police officers, she began to cry desperately, saying she was afraid of him, that he threatened her, that he forced her to participate in the schemes. She told how he manipulated her, how he made her feel useless without him, how he threatened to kill her if she tried to leave him or report him. It was at that moment, hearing the social worker's account of my mother's despair, that I began to understand something painful. She was also a victim, a different victim than me, a victim who failed to protect her own daughter, but a victim nonetheless. The hatred I felt for her began, slowly, to transform into something more complex, a mixture of pity, disappointment, and, surprisingly, a hesitant desire for understanding. I spent that night in a foster home on the outskirts of Nashville. It was a simple place, but clean and safe. There were other children there, with stories as painful or more painful than mine. Lying on a bunk bed, listening to the breathing of the other girls in the room, I thought about how my life had completely changed in just 24 hours, from buried in a hole to saved by the police, from prisoner to free. I fell asleep with a strange feeling in my chest. It wasn't happiness. There was still a lot of pain and fear there, but it was something close to hope. The hope that perhaps the worst had already passed, that from then on, things could only get better. What I didn't know, lying on that bunk bed, was that fate still held many surprises for me, that my journey was far from over, that I would still meet my mother again in circumstances I could never have imagined, and that, against all odds, I would find not only safety, but also a purpose in life, a purpose born from the very pain that almost destroyed me. But that, my dears, is a story for another moment in this long journey that has been my life. A story of new beginnings, revelations, and finally, redemption. The days that followed my escape were an emotional roller coaster. I stayed 2 weeks in that foster home in Nashville, sleeping on a narrow bunk bed, sharing meals with children whose looks were as lost as mine. Some talked about their stories openly, as if sharing the pain helped carry the weight. Others, like me, preferred silence, still trying to understand what had happened to our lives. The social worker, Ms. Martin, came to visit me regularly. It was she who brought me the first news about Alan and my mother on a rainy May afternoon as we walked through the small garden of the institution. "Your stepfather is going to be in prison for a long time, Ophelia," she told me, holding a flowery umbrella over both of us. "Besides what he did to you, they found a lot of evidence of his crimes. Drug trafficking, illegal weapons, assaults." I felt immense relief hearing that. The idea that Alan could get out, find me, take revenge, had been a constant nightmare in my poorly slept nights. "And my mother?" I asked, my voice almost disappearing. Ms. Martin sighed, adjusting the glasses that always slipped down her thin nose. "Your mother is in a complicated situation. She's not in jail, but she's facing charges of negligence and omission. She's undergoing psychological treatment and, well, she asked to see you." I stopped walking, feeling as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. See my mother? After everything that happened? The woman who stood watching while I was buried alive? "I don't want to," I answered automatically. "I never want to see her again." Ms. Martin didn't insist that day, nor in the following ones, but she always brought news of how my mother was attending all therapy sessions, of how she had gotten a job at a diner, of how she was fighting to prove she could raise me adequately. "She's trying, Ophelia," Ms. Martin would say. "People can change when they have the chance." I didn't believe that. How could someone who allowed such atrocities against their own daughter change? It was easier to maintain the hatred, the resentment. It was safer. It was at the end of the 3rd week that something unexpected happened. I was sitting in the cafeteria, unenthusiastically stirring a bowl of oatmeal, when Ms. Martin appeared accompanied by a man I had never seen before. He was a gentleman of about 60, completely white hair, wearing a simple but well-pressed suit. "Ophelia, this is Sheriff Johnson. He's handling the case involving your stepfather and would like to talk to you." The sheriff sat across from me, his face serious but kind. He explained that he needed to ask me some additional questions, things that would help ensure that Alan stayed in prison for as long as possible. It was a difficult conversation. I had to relive details of that terrible night, explain again the threats, the abuses. But then, when I thought we were finished, the sheriff took a thick folder from inside his briefcase. "There's something you need to know, Ophelia. Something about your mother and Alan that we discovered during the investigation." He opened the folder and began to show documents, photos, medical reports. As he explained, my world turned upside down once again. My mother wasn't just a passive accomplice to Alan's crimes, she was a terrified victim. The photos showed old bruises all over her body, cigarette burn marks on her back, an arm that had been broken and poorly healed. The medical reports documented recurring visits to the health clinic, always with different excuses for the injuries. "We found this hidden in your house," said the sheriff, showing a notebook with a faded blue cover. "It's your mother's diary. She had been documenting the abuse for months, but was too afraid to report it." I leafed through that notebook with trembling hands. My mother's hurried handwriting covered page after page, reporting horrors I never imagined happened inside that house. How Alan beat her when I was at school, how he threatened to kill her and me if she tried to escape or ask for help, how she had tried to escape once, only to be found and dragged back by his friends who seemed to be everywhere in town. And then, on the last page, an entry from the day I was buried in the yard. He buried her. My God, he buried my daughter. I stood watching, too cowardly to do anything. If I scream, he'll kill us both. If I run for help, he'll finish burying her before I return. I'm trapped in a no-way-out situation. May God forgive me for what I allowed to happen to my girl. May God forgive me for not having the courage she has. Tears were running down my face as I read those words. They weren't excuses. They didn't erase what had happened. But they showed me something I hadn't been able to see before. My mother, as trapped as I was in that house of horrors, just with different chains. Why did she never tell? I asked the sheriff, my voice choked. Why did she never ask for help? Fear does terrible things to people, Ophelia. Your stepfather had connections with dangerous criminals. Your mother genuinely believed that you would both be killed if she tried to escape. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of those revelations hanging between us like a dense cloud. Then, the sheriff continued. There's one more thing you should know. Alan wasn't just any drug dealer. He was the main distributor in the Oak Ridge region. He used your house as a front, and your mother and you as shields. No one would suspect a family man. I thought of all the times Alan received friends at home, the whispered conversations on the porch, the bags that mysteriously appeared and disappeared. It all made sense now. When you reported him, Ophelia, you didn't just save yourself. You helped dismantle a drug network that was destroying families throughout the region. You're braver than you imagine. I returned to the foster home that day with my head buzzing. The revelations had turned my world upside down. The hatred I felt for my mother was beginning to transform into something more complex, more painful, more human. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of understanding. A week later, I finally agreed to see her. The meeting took place in a small room at the Nashville courthouse with Ms. Martin present as a supervisor. When my mother entered, I almost didn't recognize her. She was thinner, her face marked by deep circles under her eyes, her hair without its former shine. But there was something different in her eyes, a clarity I had never seen before. We stayed in silence for long seconds, just looking at each other. Then, without warning, she fell to her knees in front of me, sobbing. "Forgive me, daughter. For the love of God, forgive me for not protecting you." I couldn't answer. Part of me wanted to scream, accuse, throw in her face every moment of pain I had gone through while she watched. Another part just wanted to hug her and cry together, two survivors of the same shipwreck. What I did in the end was extend my hand and touch her shoulder. A simple gesture, neither forgiveness nor rejection, just acknowledgement. We are here, we survived, and now, what will we do with that? In the months that followed, our relationship began to be rebuilt, brick by brick. It wasn't easy. There were days when the anger returned with full force, when I refused to take her calls or attend supervised meetings. There were days when she also retreated, overwhelmed by guilt, by shame. But there were also moments of genuine connection, like when she brought an old photo album and showed me for the first time a photo of my father. A thin man, with a shy smile, holding a guitar. He played at town parties, she told me. That's how we met. He died before knowing you existed, but he would have loved you so much, Ophelia. Or when I confessed that I dreamed of finishing my studies, maybe even going to college one day, and saw a genuine sparkle of pride in her eyes. You were always the smart one in the family, she said. You'll achieve anything you want in life. After 6 months of intensive psychological treatment, supervised visits, and constant evaluations from the Child Welfare Board, my mother finally received authorization to take me back home. Not to the same house where the horrors happened, that one had been sold to pay for lawyers and debts left by Alan. It was a new place, a tiny apartment in a housing project on the outskirts of Nashville. 2 cramped rooms, simple furniture donated by charities, but it was ours, and more importantly, it was safe. We're going to start over, my mother promised on the day I moved in. Just the 2 of us, building something better. It wasn't a fairy tale. Life was hard. My mother worked 2 jobs to be able to pay the rent and keep food on the table. I went back to school, trying to make up for lost time, facing the curious looks and whispers of classmates who knew fragments of my story. At night, I still had nightmares about the hole in the yard, about large hands holding me, about dirt covering my face. Sometimes I woke up screaming, and my mother would come running, hold me until the images dissipated. She also had her own demons. Sometimes I caught her crying silently while washing dishes or folding clothes. Other times, she would startle at loud noises, as if expecting Alan to appear at any moment. We were 2 broken people trying to glue each other's pieces back together. Imperfect, painful, but genuine. It was during this period that I discovered something about my mother that I had never imagined. She dreamed of being a nurse. She had even started the course before getting pregnant with me, but abandoned it when financial difficulties tightened. I always wanted to care for people, she told me one night, as we ate instant noodles at our improvised little table. I guess that's why it hurts so much not being able to care for you properly. It's never too late to start over, I replied, surprised by my own words. The next day, I brought home pamphlets from a nursing technical course that accepted scholarship students. Her eyes shone like I hadn't seen in years. It was the first step in a journey that, without our knowing then, would completely change our lives. In the following 2 years, our life found a new rhythm. My mother studied at night, after long days as a waitress. I dedicated myself to school, determined to get grades high enough to earn a scholarship in the future. On weekends, we did house cleaning together in family homes to supplement our income. Gradually, the wounds began to heal. They didn't disappear completely, they never would. But we learned to live with them, to transform them into something that strengthened us instead of destroying us. It was in one of those weekend cleaning jobs that we met the family that would change the course of our history again. Dr. Regina, a respected psychiatrist from Nashville, and her husband, Dr. Paul, who taught at the medical school. They treated us with a respect we had never experienced before, always offering fresh water, sometimes even inviting us to lunch after we finished the service. I was 16 then, and Dr. Regina soon noticed my interest in the books that filled the shelves of the house. One day, she caught me leafing through a volume on psychology. "Are you interested in this?" she asked. "Very much," I replied shyly. "I think, after everything I've been through, I want to understand how the mind works, why people do what they do." It was the beginning of a mentorship I could never have imagined. Dr. Regina began to lend me books, to invite me to lectures at the university, to talk to me about cases she attended, without revealing identities, of course. When I mentioned my dream of studying psychology one day, but my fear of never being able to afford college, she smiled. "There are scholarships, Ophelia. With your school record and your life story, you have great chances, and I'm going to help you get one." And she helped. More than I could dream. But that's a part of the story yet to come. The story of how a girl who was buried alive managed not only to survive, but to flourish. The story of how pain can be transformed into purpose, and how the worst moments of our lives can surprisingly lead us to the best. The year 1977 marked a complete turning point in my life. I had just turned 20 and was holding in my hands an envelope that would change my destiny forever. The acceptance letter to the psychology department at Vanderbilt University with a full scholarship. When I read that letter, sitting in our small kitchen in Nashville, I cried like a child. They weren't tears of sadness, like so many I had shed throughout my life, but of an almost unbearable joy. "I did it, Mom!" I shouted, showing the paper to my mother, who had just arrived from the hospital where she worked as a nursing assistant. "I'm going to be a psychologist!" She dropped her bag on the floor and hugged me tight, sobbing along with me. In that embrace there was so much: pride, redemption, the promise of a future that neither of us would have dared to dream years ago when we were trapped in that house of horrors in Oak Ridge. The path to get there hadn't been easy. After we met Dr. Regina and Dr. Paul, our life began to change gradually. With their help, I got a scholarship to finish high school at a better school. My mother completed the nursing technical course and got a job at the municipal hospital, earning a salary that, for the first time, allowed us more than just to survive. We still lived in the same small apartment, but now it had colorful curtains, a shelf full of books, many borrowed from Dr. Regina, and even a black and white television that we bought in 12 hard-earned installments. On the walls, instead of the raw plaster, we had put up flowery wallpaper, hiding the moisture stains. They were small luxuries, but they symbolized how far we had come. Dr. Regina became more than a mentor to me. She was almost a second mother. She spent hours helping me study for college entrance exams, lent me books that went far beyond the school curriculum, took me to lectures and debates at the university. When I confessed my specific interest in psychological trauma and recovery, she introduced me to colleagues who specialized in the area, broadening my horizons. "You have something many psychologists will never have, Ophelia," she told me one day as we walked through the corridors of the hospital where I was doing a volunteer internship. "You lived through trauma firsthand. You know the pain from the inside. That will give you an empathy and understanding that no book can teach." Those words were engraved in me. For the first time, I saw my traumatic experience not just as a scar, but as a powerful tool that I could use to help others. My pain could have a purpose. When I finally entered university, I immersed myself in my studies with an insatiable thirst. I devoured books, participated in all the study groups, asked questions that sometimes left even the professors thoughtful. Some colleagues found me intensely serious, almost obsessed. They didn't understand that for me, each class, each theory, each concept was a piece in the puzzle of my own recovery. Freud, Jung, Skinner, Rogers, each of these theorists offered me different lenses to look not only at the future of the patients I would one day attend, but at my own past. I began to understand the mechanisms of fear, dissociation, post-traumatic stress. I began to give names to the monsters that still occasionally visited my dreams. In my second year of college, something unexpected happened. Dr. Regina invited me to accompany her in a pilot project she was developing, a support group for women victims of domestic violence. Not as a therapist, of course, I was still just a student, but as an observer, someone who could learn in practice. "I think it will be good for them. And for you," she said, with that penetrating look that seemed to see through all my defenses. My first day in that group changed my life forever. Sitting in a circle with 8 women of different ages and stories, I heard accounts that painfully echoed with my own experience. One had been beaten by her husband for 10 years before managing to escape. Another had been abused by her uncle since childhood with the complicit silence of the family. A third had tried to report her violent partner 3 times, but the police never did anything. I remained silent most of the time, observing, absorbing. But at the end of the session, an older lady, with cigarette burn marks on her arms, so similar to the ones my mother had, looked directly at me. "And you, girl? What's your story?" I felt Dr. Regina's gaze on me, not pressing, just supporting. I took a deep breath and, for the first time outside a controlled environment of therapy or police investigation, I told my story. I told about Alan, about the hole in the yard, about my mother paralyzed by fear, about the night buried under the rain, about the escape plan. When I finished, the silence in the room was dense, almost palpable. Then, one by one, those women stood up and hugged me. There was no pity in their eyes. There was recognition, solidarity, the deep connection of those who know the same pain. "You survived," said the lady with the burns, holding my hands between hers. "And you're here, studying, rebuilding yourself. It gives me hope that my granddaughter can also have a future, even after everything she saw in that house." I left that session transformed. Dr. Regina, with her silent wisdom, knew exactly what she was doing by taking me there. It wasn't just for me to learn. It was for me to realize that my story, as painful as it was, could be a light for other women in similar situations. From that day on, my path in psychology became clear. I would be a therapist specializing in trauma, focusing especially on women and children victims of violence. Every course, every internship, every reading I did from then on was directed toward that goal. In my last year of college, I met Charles, a psychiatry student who attended some interdisciplinary seminars that I also took. He was a quiet young man, with gentle eyes and always clean hands. Something I immediately noticed, perhaps because of the contrast with Alan's hands, always dirty with earth and grease. Charles had a sharp intelligence, but also a rare sensitivity among the men I had known. Our friendship began with discussions about clinical cases, debates about therapeutic approaches, exchanges of articles and books. Gradually, it transformed into something more. It took me time to trust, to lower the walls I had built around my heart. But Charles was patient, respecting my time, my limits, never pressuring me. When I finally told him my whole story on a starry night by the Cumberland River, he showed no horror, disgust, or pity, reactions I so feared. Instead, he held my hand and simply said, "Thank you for trusting me with this. You are the strongest person I've ever known." It was at that moment that I knew I could love him. Not with the desperate and dependent love I saw in so many traumatized women, but with an adult, conscious, chosen love. We graduated in the same year. I in psychology, he, in medicine, already directed toward a residency in psychiatry. 2 years later, we married in a simple ceremony in the flower-filled backyard of Dr. Regina and Dr. Paul's house, who had become a second family for both of us. My mother, now a trained and respected nurse at the hospital where she worked, cried throughout the entire ceremony. It was a different crying than I knew, not of pain or fear, but of a deep joy, perhaps mixed with relief. Her daughter, whom she once failed to protect, was now building a full life with a good man by her side. Our life together began modestly, but full of purpose. Charles started his residency in psychiatry. I got a position at an NGO that worked with women in vulnerable situations. The salary was low, but the work fulfilled me in a way that nothing else could. In 1983, at 26, I defended my master's in clinical psychology with a dissertation on resilience in survivors of severe trauma. The examining board, composed of renowned professors, was impressed with the depth of the work, not knowing that much of what I wrote came not only from academic research, but from my own healing journey. It was in that same year that I discovered I was pregnant with our first child. The news brought joy, but also a fear I hadn't expected to feel. Would I be able to protect this child? Would I know how to be a good mother, having had such a flawed example? What if the traumas of my past affected my ability to mother? Charles, with his usual calmness, helped me navigate through these fears. We started couple therapy, not because we were having problems, but as preparation for parenthood. We wanted to enter this new phase with our eyes open, aware of our own traumas and triggers. Peter was born on a rainy April dawn in 1984 after a difficult but transformative birth. When I put him to my chest for the first time, something blossomed inside me. A love so immense, so fierce, that it almost hurt. At that moment, I made a silent promise. This boy would never know the kind of fear that dominated my childhood. He would be protected, loved, respected in his individuality. 2 years later came Mariana, our daughter with curious eyes and an easy smile. Our family was complete. Our small circle of love and security established in a world that I knew was often cruel. Balancing motherhood with a career wasn't easy, especially in an era when women were expected to prioritize home above all else. But Charles was a partner in the full sense of the word, equally sharing responsibilities, supporting my professional projects, creating space for me to follow my vocation while also being a mother. In 1990, with the children already in school, I took the step I had dreamed of for so long. I opened my own clinic, specializing in psychological trauma, with a special focus on women and children, victims of violence. It started small, just me and a colleague from the NGO where I had worked, in a rented room in downtown Nashville. The differential of our approach was that we never charged women who couldn't pay. We established a system where patients with greater purchasing power subsidized the treatment of the less favored. We didn't get rich with this model, but we managed to help hundreds of women who otherwise would never have had access to quality psychological treatment. It was in this clinic that I developed what would later be known as the Ophelia method, a specific therapeutic approach for complex trauma, combining techniques from different psychological schools with practices that I myself developed from my personal and professional experience. The work grew, gained recognition. I began to be invited to give lectures, workshops, trainings for mental health professionals. I wrote articles, then a book that became a reference in the field. The girl who was once buried alive in a backyard in Oak Ridge was now a respected authority in the treatment of psychological trauma. But professional recognition, as gratifying as it was never what mattered most to me. What really moved me were the eyes of the women we attended, seeing them go from paralyzing fear to cautious hope, and finally, to renewed strength. It was witnessing their journeys from victims to survivors, and finally, to whole people, rediscovering their own voice, their own power. While our clinic was growing, my mother faced her own challenges. In 1995, she began to show the first signs of something we didn't immediately understand: forgetfulness, confusion, mood changes. For a few months, we attributed it to work stress, to advancing age. But when she forgot how to get back home after visiting my house, a path she took almost weekly, we knew it was something more serious. The diagnosis came as a blow. early onset Alzheimer's. She was only 58 years old. The doctors explained that it was a rare, genetic form, probably inherited from her father's side of the family. That side I barely knew, of a father I never had the chance to meet. The fear in her eyes when she received the news reminded me of the frightened girl I once was. "I don't want to forget you, daughter," she whispered, holding my hand tightly. "I don't want to forget everything we've achieved together." In the following years, our roles reversed. I, who was once the daughter she couldn't protect, now became the caregiver she desperately needed. Charles, always my safe harbor, reorganized our life to accommodate this new reality. We adapted our house, hired caregivers for the periods when we were working, created routines that helped reduce her confusion. It was a painful journey, seeing her gradually lose memories, skills, the very essence of who she was. But they were also years of a deep connection we had never experienced before. In moments of lucidity, we talked about the past, not just about the horrors we lived through, but also about the small joys we managed to find even in the darkest times. "Remember that time you made a cake with what was in the pantry, and it turned out so hard we used it as a doorstop?" She would laugh, her eyes momentarily clearing. "Or when we got that stray kitten and hid it from Alan for 3 whole weeks. These shared memories, even the simplest ones, helped heal old wounds we didn't even know were still open. It was as if, facing the threat of losing all memories, we could finally look at the past with a new perspective, seeing not just the pain, but also the resilience, the moments of connection that survived despite everything. My mother passed away in 2004 on a quiet Sunday afternoon. She was sitting on the porch of our house, watching my children, her grandchildren, playing in the garden. Suddenly, she smiled, extended her hand as if greeting someone only she could see, and closed her eyes for the last time. The doctors said it was an aneurysm, quick and painless. I like to think that, in the last moment, she might have seen my father coming to get her, that man with the guitar I never knew, but whose blood runs in my veins. Her loss left an immense void, but also a strange feeling of completeness. Our circle had closed. The mother who couldn't protect me as a child had received my protection in her final years. We had, somehow, healed each other. Today, at 68, I look back and see a life I could never have imagined on that terrible night in the rain-soaked backyard of Oak Ridge. I have 2 wonderful children, both health professionals. Peter followed his father's footsteps in psychiatry. Mariana became a social worker. I have 4 grandchildren who grow up in an environment of love and respect, who will never know the kind of fear that dominated my childhood. The clinic I founded more than 30 years ago is now a national reference center in trauma treatment, with branches in 3 state capitals. The Ophelia method is taught in universities, applied in public mental health programs. I've trained hundreds of therapists who now spread this work across the entire country. I still see some patients, women with particularly difficult stories who are referred to me by colleagues. To each of them, I tell a little about my own journey, not as a therapist, but as a survivor. Because I know that sometimes what we most need to hear when we're at rock bottom is that someone has been there before and managed to get out. And that's why, my dears, I decided to share my story with you today. Because I know that among the thousands of people watching this video, there is someone who is going through their own particular hell. Someone who thinks there is no way out, that the pain is too great to bear, that the scars are too deep to heal. To that person I want to say, you are stronger than you imagine. The darkness is not forever. There is a way out, however impossible it may seem right now. I know, because I walked that path, step by step, day after day. From the grave in the backyard to the classroom, from terror to healing, from victim to healer. If my story touched your heart in any way, please leave your like, subscribe here to Grandparents' Tales. Each subscription helps us reach more people who need to hear stories of overcoming like mine. And if you want to comment where you're watching from, I'd love to hear from you. Always remember, your story doesn't end in the most painful chapter. There are pages not yet written, waiting for you. And in those pages, there may be more light, more love, more purpose than you ever imagined possible. With all my love, this 68-year-old grandma who was once a girl buried alive, but who found the strength to rise from the earth and reach for the stars.